Want to crack this thing?
Yeah.
How's that?
Let's now start. Chairman Hanna, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the subcommittee, on behalf of our National Commander, Michael D. Helm, and the 2.3 million members of the American Legion, we thank you for this opportunity to testify today. The American Legion identifies three main issues that poses obstacles for veteran-owned small businesses: reverse auctions, difference between Small Business Administration and Department of Veteran Affairs procurement standards, and exclusion of veterans from disadvantaged business enterprise programs in the Department of Transportation. On reverse auctions, government has a fiduciary responsibility to treat small businesses fairly and not take advantage of its buying power to become predatory. The American Legion appreciates the goal of lowering federal expenditure through competitive contracting initiatives, but we are concerned that misuse of non-governmental platforms could put veteran small businesses at risk and limit job creation. The American Legion is also concerned that reverse auctions will lead to decreased quality because these platforms encourage vendors to provide the cheapest product and services in order to maintain the smallest profit margins to stay competitive. Government is therefore purchasing substandard products and services because reverse auctions steer agencies to shop for lowest pricing and not for best value. These business models favor home-based businesses that primarily operate online with no customer support. Businesses like these rely on federal procurement as their sole source of income, and their tight profit margins do not incentivize job creation. When something is bad for small business, the American Legion recommends simply doing away with it. The federal dollars spent in purchasing reverse auction services are better utilized in hiring more contracting officers to do market research to ensure that procurements are made at fair market value. A reverse auction is a shortcut contracting officers resort to because there simply aren't enough of them. On VA verification, the American Legion supports verification. Contracting officers are risk averse, and they prefer giving contracts to firms that have undergone third-party vetting. So we understand why contracting officers have started asking SCVOSBs if they are CVE verified. However, this has added to the confusion of having two vetting processes for two agencies for relatively the same purpose. To cut down on the confusion, we asked the committee to consider a single set of standards for all SCVOSBs to contract with the federal government. We would defer to the committee's expertise in selecting the agency most capable of undertaking this task. The American Legion also believes that SBA and VA need to work together to minimize inconsistencies in the decisions being made. The main challenge with VA verification is striking the balance between the amount of intrusion necessary to substantiate size, ownership, and control, and the requisite amount of oversight to protect the integrity of the program. Including SBA in the appeals process would ensure consistency in the final decisions being made and provide impartiality in not having the agency of original jurisdiction review their previously denied applications. Further, SBA has the legal expertise, decades of experience, and ample base of presidential case law that can be applied to a formalized appeals process. Lastly, regarding the Department of Transportation's DBE program. By law, the federal government is mandated to award no less than 3% of all federal contracts to SCVOSBs. For a number of reasons, few agencies have not met this goal. One of the most egregious exclusions of veteran-owned small businesses occurs in the Department of Transportation's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise Program, which mandates that states receiving federal dollars for infrastructure repair have to set aside 10% for preferred groups of small businesses. It is a misconception that this 10% is solely relegated to road and infrastructure construction firms. There are a variety of industries involved, such as engineering, landscaping, remediation, utilities, and information technology. This is an issue that affects all veteran small businesses. The American Legion worked closely with Congressman Mike Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania to amend current legislation to add veteran-owned small business concerns as a separate line to the list of entities eligible in the program, and such an addition would not presume that veterans are socially and economically disadvantaged. Instead, VOSBs would be considered independently eligible for participation in the DBE program. In previous Congresses, Congressman Fitzpatrick has introduced the Fairness to Veterans for Infrastructure Investment Act that makes this change. The American Legion and numerous other veteran service organizations support this bill and will ask again for this committee's support when Congress reauthorizes the Federal Highway Bill. Thank you, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you. Ms. Dorfman?
Chairman Hanna, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on behalf of our over 500,000 members of the U.S. Women's Chamber of Commerce. While reverse auctions have the potential to deliver savings for the government, we have concerns with the process and outcomes. Small business owners may be pushed to lower bids to their own detriment. The complexity and risks involved in an auction may drive down competition by causing potential bidders not to participate. And there is a risk of circumventing regulations related to the small business requirements. In many instances, it may be more efficient and cost-effective to simply purchase off a schedule. Regarding verifications, our members are concerned about the failure of the SBA to verify firms claiming to be small and to meet the socioeconomic requirements. Congress established programs to support our nation's efforts to reach full productive capacity and assure a fair portion of Federal contracts are placed with the full spectrum of small businesses. The SBA is charged with accurately identifying and verifying eligible firms as small, veteran-owned, women-owned, etc. Unfortunately, the Small Business Administration has failed at the most basic requirement. For the last decade, the Inspector General's annual report on the most serious management and performance challenges, listed the top challenge at the SBA as allowing large firms to obtain small business contracts and allowing agencies to count these contracts toward their small business goals. The SBA's failure to verify small business and socioeconomic claims became a major issue when the service-disabled veteran-owned small business set-aside was created. The SBA did not establish any eligibility verification for the program, creating fraud and abuse as contracts went to ineligible firms. This issue became more complicated when the VA began their own VETS contracting program with its own certification. The VETS First program is only for specific contracting opportunities within the VA and has different eligibility requirements from the SBA's SDVOSB program. Some members of Congress have suggested the VA's verification for the VETS First program should be moved to the SBA and paid for by the VA. The idea stems back from a lack of understanding that the SDVOSB program, which is under the SBA's management enforcement, has a different purpose and different requirements from the VA's VET First program. Since the SBA failed to create a verification process for the SDVOSB, businesses and agencies are confused, and legitimate service-disabled veteran-owned firms have lost hundreds of millions of dollars. More recently, due to the SBA's poor regulatory implementation and enforcement of the Women-Owned Set-Aside program, the Government Accountability Office found that more than 40% of businesses securing women-owned set-asides were ineligible. Thankfully, Congress and the President acted through recent passage of the National Defense Authorization Act to remove self-certification from the Women-Owned Set-Aside program, which, when implemented, will elevate the verification for this program. We appreciate Congress stepping up to force the SBA to do what it should have done all along, and ask this committee to hold the SBA accountable for the expedient creation of strong regulations to improve verification. As Congress passes legislation to achieve governmental goals, we rely on the SBA to prepare and enforce regulations that successfully fulfill your intent. In this area, the SBA has failed woefully. The regulations developed and enforced by the SBA for the Women-Owned Set-Aside program were flawed from the start. The SBA ignored stakeholder input on the inability of the processes to ensure that only qualified women-owned firms receive set-asides, created grossly complex document management process, and turned contracting officers into de facto certifiers, driving down the desire to use the program. We ask that the House Small Business Committee hold a full committee hearing with the SBA to understand how this plan will be implemented for the law. The SBA failed to establish verification for the SDVOSB program, causing hundreds of millions of dollars to be lost. Sorry. Oh, I'm right. Sorry. The SBA failed to establish verification for the SDVOSB program, causing hundreds of millions of dollars to be lost to fraud and abuse and setting up confusions between SBA's program and the VA's program. The SBA has also failed to staff an appropriate number of procurement center representatives. PCRs enforce the requirement for small business set-asides in their regions, the most crucial frontline team to assure that a fair portion of purchases are placed with small business concerns is not a regulatory enforcement priority for the SBA. We agree with the budget views of the committee. The SBA must allocate greater use of their funds to core congressionally mandated activities. Rather than funding the SBA's extra layers of non-essential management and non-mandated programs, we recommend funds be directed to regulatory enforcement and direct small business services. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll yield to Ranking Member Velazquez for our first questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Dorfman, some of the problems that exist in the verification of veterans are also present in the women's program due to the ability to self-certify. However, due to legislation I authored that was included in last year's NDAA, businesses will no longer be able to self-certify their eligibility for the women's program. Yet, we know some damage has already been done. Can you discuss some of the ramifications that the allowance of self-certification has done to these programs, the women's program in particular? And I would like for Ms. Peebles also to comment on that.
Certainly. Thank you. As the GAO report mentioned, that it was 2012 and 2013 for both years, 40% of the contracts going to quote-unquote awarded to women-owned firms actually went to ineligible firms. So that's billions of dollars of lost opportunity. The U.S. Women's Chamber of Commerce is a third-party certifier. We did a similar quick review probably a year ago where we found that out of all those applications that had come in, we had denied 39%, and 53% of those ended up self-certifying, so they are receiving contracts, and there's no way that the SBA has been the SBA has not followed up at this point to mitigate that situation.
Ms. Peebles?
Thank you.
Speaking on behalf of WIP, we are absolutely against any fraud in any of these small business programs. I do think that a concern or a focus of ours would be to ensure the sole source authority move along speedily, but not at the expense of the certification process intervening with that.
Okay. As SBA develops its own verification process for WOSBs, what are some key factors you think the agency should be focusing on to reduce instances of fraud in the program? Ms. Dorfman?
There certainly needs to be much more follow-up when they're actually doing the process. They'll be able to identify those that are truly women-owned firms versus those that are masquerading as women-owned firms, and I think they need to make sure that their regulations and their processes are in compliance with their own regulations.
Thank you. Mr. Gordon, since the use of reverse auctions became allowable, there have been calls from various stakeholders for the Office of Federal Procurement Policy to issue regulations and guidelines as to how and when reverse auctions should be used. However, while there have been several rounds of data collection, we have yet to see the issuance of any policy. As a former OFPP administrator, why do you believe there has been such hesitation to publish these much-needed guidelines and regulations?
As a former administrator, I would have some sympathy for the workload that very small office has. Mm-hmm. They have very few people, and they have an enormous responsibility. I would say that we need government-wide guidance. I'm not sure we need statutes that go into any detail. I'm not sure that we need an amendment to the Federal Acquisition Regulation. I worry that technology changes very quickly. So I would say that whatever goes into statute or the FAR should be at a very high level, sort of basic principles that you need training, you mustn't abuse them, et cetera. But we absolutely need to get government-wide guidance. Our contracting officers across the government don't know what procurements are suitable for these, and they don't appreciate.
And the training that will go with that.
The training is critical. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gordon. Mr. Leghorn, I am really happy to hear in your testimony you stating that there has been some improvement to the VA's verification process, including a decrease in the time it takes for a business to receive its initial decision. Also, you noted that you have received fewer requests for counseling services in the verification process. Do you believe this means that the VA has finally turned things around for the certification process?
Thank you for your question. VA, yes, they're coming around, but I don't think they have completely turned the corner yet.
Okay.
There's still some discrepancies in the quality of decisions that are being made, but by far, when it comes to time, and if we could use time alone as a barometer of success, they've done a really good job.
So how do you feel about the call made by some to move the VA process to SBA completely?
Again, like in our testimony, we don't have a preference. We believe that there needs to be certification agency-wide, and we rely on this committee's expertise to tell us whether that's going to be an agency or a third party that would do this.
Thank you. My time expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Gordon, in your testimony, you clearly said that for commodities you don't have a problem, which is pretty, it's reasonable. If you had the opportunity to eliminate in its entirety reverse bidding only for commodities versus us trying to figure out all the nuances and dynamics of the different types of businesses, where would you go?
Mr. Chairman, I want to be sure I understand the question. Eliminate reverse auctions for commodities or for
everything but commodities. Would that produce an outcome that is more desirable than trying to work through what we have in front of us?
It might make sense. Of course, defining commodity is not such a simple thing.
Sure.
But I am very concerned that, A, our people across the government don't know how problematic it is to do a reverse auction when you're focused on quality and past performance, et cetera. And they don't realize that buying services, especially professional services, you don't want to be doing a reverse auction. What happens, sir, you can have situations where a company wins the auction but doesn't get the contract.
Right.
So you're driving down price, even though price isn't really your focus. I often tell people, if you want to, if you want to do a reverse auction to buy surgery services, be sure you don't particularly like the patient, because you're going to be driving down the price on something where you should be focused on other than price. I think it would be a step forward, at least as a cautionary move, to say, don't use reverse auctions for non-commodities.
So take the time to define what we mean by commodities and throw the rest. What do you think, Ms. Pebbles?
I think the professor is fascinating, to say that. My knowledge of the reverse auctions is not as in-depth as the professor's. However, there are, again, concerns that I, as a private citizen and as a business owner that has attempted to use FedBid, have about the process. And one of my concerns is the lag feature, which, if I'm not mistaken, according to the GAO report, is an arbitrary feature, meaning that when you submit a price, It will immediately show that you're lagging, indicating that somebody else is bidding against you.
Which may not be the reality.
Which may not be the case. And if I may just speak as a private citizen, as a taxpayer, and as a business owner that's used this feature and have responded to that lag feature, I have concerns because every time my company receives a prime contract, I, as president, sign a document, Truth in Negotiations Act, which has penalties if I have done that in bad faith. And I frankly think that we're a better country than that to use deception in a federal procurement.
Anyone else want to weigh in? I kind of agree with you. I mean, I'm weaving through this, and what's obvious is the very, very subjective nature and the complexity of so many different types of products and outcomes we're looking for. Almost it defies reason that we would even use reverse auctioning. So I appreciate that. I'm going to yield to Ms. Chu for 5 minutes if you have anything. Thank you.
Mr. Leghorn, you testified that the American Legion has found that instead of fostering positive partner relationships between government and industry, the use of reverse auctions has actually cultivated resentment between buyers and sellers, ruining any potential constructive relationship to be had. Can you give us an example of a time when you've seen the partnership deteriorate?
So I am not the expert on reverse auctions for the American Legion. Can I take that one for the record and get a specific example back to you at a later date?
Sure.
Thanks.
Mr. Gordon, you've brought up many points about the problems with reverse auctions, including something that I'd not heard of before, the use of a private company, FedBid, to administer the data, which could be a conflict of interest. Can a reverse auction be fair? And if so, what would an ideal reverse auction look like?
Thank you for the question. Again, I want to emphasize that FedBid does a very good job. The problem is their situation creates, as you said, a conflict of interest. If I could give you an example. If a company's bidding and they bid $100 in a reverse auction, what shows up on the screen for everybody, including the agency, isn't $100. It's $103 because FedBid adds its bid automatically, and people don't realize that the figure they're seeing on the screen is not what the company's bidding. It's what they're bidding plus the private company's fee. What GAO found was that when GAO asked agencies, are you paying a fee to FedBid? There were agency personnel that said, no, we don't pay any fee to FedBid. It is extraordinary that the data is completely under the control of FedBid. I worked at GAO for 17 years. I don't recall ever seeing a GAO report where when you go through it, every chart, every graph, where they list the source, FedBid data, FedBid data. GAO didn't have access to agency data because the agencies don't have the data. You want to have a system where there's not a conflict of interest, where the decision about whether to use a reverse auction is based on what makes sense for the government in that procurement, unencumbered by some private company's corporate interest, where they get a fee, regardless of whether it makes sense to use reverse auction, regardless of whether you have competition. Even if you only get one bid, they're going to get their fee. You want to avoid any sort of conflict of interest.
So you're saying that our federal government doesn't even have the data with which to make a sensible decision?
GAO pointed out, and I think they're right, agencies can't decide whether it makes sense to use a reverse auction because they don't have the data. At the very least, agencies need to be in control of the data. They need to have the training. They need to realize that they can't abdicate their responsibility. I think that the reason agencies let FedBid make the decisions is because it's easier. It's not because FedBid's doing anything wrong. On the contrary, they're so good that the agencies say, okay, well, FedBid says this is a good procurement for a reverse auction. Let's go for it. That's our federal officials abdicating their responsibility, and we need to avoid that happening.
Thank you for that. Switching gears, Ms. Peoples and Ms. Dorfman, I have consternation constantly about the fact that we've never met our 5% goal for women-owned businesses. And in fact, last year it was 3.6%. Once again, we did not make it. But finally, women-owned businesses will get the designation they deserve through the sole sourcing provision passed in last year's NDAA. Do you believe that implementing this provision for women-owned small businesses is enough to rectify the lack of access that female entrepreneurs have to government contracts?
I can. First off, it's actually the removal of the self-certification that will make it better for women-owned firms so that they're competing against women-owned firms. The sole source is something the contracting officers need because in some industries there's only one women-owned firm that can perform that work, and so they need to have that. But I think that impacts the program at a far less percentage than the women-owned small business certification being the SBA having to do it or making sure it's done properly with a follow-up, however they're planning to implement it. So, and I'm hoping that that gets implemented very quickly. I don't know that it will. And I'm looking toward this committee to help to hold them accountable to make sure that they do implement it fairly speedily. Thank you.
Ms. Peoples?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. We're very optimistic that the 5% set aside will certainly go a long way to helping to eliminate these gaps in the percentages of meeting the procurement goals. Having said that, I think the additional impact is that now woman-owned businesses can plan strategically for their marketing and their procurement strategy now that this is in place. The way to make it most impactful is to get the regulations in place quickly so that woman-owned business can start utilizing it and taking advantage of it now.
Thank you. I yield back.
Ms. Lawrence?
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member, for holding this hearing. The 2013 goals for awarding contracts to service-disabled veteran-owned businesses has surpassed the 3% statutory goal. This is a positive development. But with the unemployment rate for veterans who served since 2001, currently it's at 9%. We have a long way to go. Mr. Leghorn, the disparity in the verification systems for veteran-owned businesses at the SBA and the Department of Veterans, VA, I'm concerned that it may lead to the awarding of contracts to some fraudulent parties. Do you believe that veteran-owned businesses may have lost out on contracts that normally would have been received, and this would be due to the lack of clarity in the verification system? And answer that, and then tell me, what do you recommend that we do to correct it?
Thank you for your question. So with there being two procurement policies in terms of how SDVOSEs participate in federal procurements, on the self-certification side, you're always going to find fraud, and on the verification side, if you're a bad actor and you want to defraud the government, there's still a way around it because it's a very document-driven process. So my answer to the first part of the question is government can only do so much to check up on people. Mm-hmm. If you're somebody that is out there trying to purposely defraud the government, you're going to know your way around the system. And so what can we do about it? SBA or VA, they need the resources to do more on-site visits. That is one way that is that you could catch people in the act. And it's about moving the agencies to take reportings of or allegations of when somebody is trying to defraud the government or is a bad actor within the community, and to take those allegations seriously and to look into it in a prompt manner.
I want to thank the committee and those of you who are testifying, the women-owned and veteran-owned businesses, and our commitment through the SBA is something that I'm very committed to. But we must find ways to validate that and eliminate as much fraud as we can. Unfortunately, enforcing the research and the processes so that we can identify the fraud is the first step, but also to have our systems and verifications in a way that it rises all tide. But the women and the veteran businesses, and I thank you for your expertise in this, and I yield my time.
Ms. Bang?
Thank you all for being here and for sharing your experiences with us. First, I want to thank Congressman Hanna for introducing his legislation to ban reverse auctions in certain areas. I believe the legislation is a good step forward, and I hope there will be even more we can do to protect small businesses from the use of reverse auctions. Although some will argue that reverse auctions benefit the government by offering lower prices, we have often been left with junk bidders that provide subpar service. My question is, as a follow-up to something that was mentioned on Tuesday's subcommittee hearing, where do you see contracting goals headed? Do you believe that there has been too much of an emphasis on dollars for our prime and subcontracting goals and not enough emphasis on the diversity and quantity of businesses receiving these opportunities? And, of course, any recommendations? And anyone's feel free to answer.
I'll jump in. It has been a frustration that there continues to be double counting within the socioeconomic categories, because what that does is the person with the most certifications gets the contract. It would be far better to make sure that as their agencies are counting their goals, that they're saying, okay, if you're 8A HUBZone service disabled veteran woman owned, then which one is that going to, so that more small businesses have access to those contracts? Thank you.
Thank you. No, I'm good. We're all good. Thank you. We can open up to another round of questionings for anyone who may have any. I'm going to show you something on the screen. Can you get it up there?
Well, that must be this.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. This is a shot from FedBid Biz Operations, the federal website where all federal contracts are advertised. I'm sure you've all seen it. This lets you search by contracting office. So if you want to do business with a GSA in D.C., you can choose that option. However, what this screenshot shows is that the federal government has classified FedBid as a private company, as a contracting office of the federal government. I'm just curious if anyone thinks that's appropriate or inappropriate. And if you think it leads to confusion, so kind of go ahead, Gordon.
Mr. Chairman, it is the problem. It is a real problem. Again, it's not because FedBid doesn't do a good job. They do a great job, but they're doing work that is closely associated with inherently governmental work, and the lines getting blurred. You're seeing mission creep. So when you're looking on FedBizOps, which is a federal website, you're looking for a government office, there's FedBid. It is, I think we need to think long and hard. If we're going to have a private company running these auctions, we have got to have adequate federal supervision so you don't have this sort of confusion. If I could tell you one quick anecdote. Other people, when they have a spring break at a law school, go to like Florida, Fort Lauderdale or whatever. I spent my spring break a couple of weeks ago in Macedonia, in Southeast Europe, learning about procurement and speaking about procurement to government officials there. They do electronic reverse auctions. In Macedonia, a small country, not a rich or sophisticated one. I said to them, do you have a private company running your reverse auctions? They looked at me like I was crazy. They said, of course not. We have our government officials running reverse auctions. I thought that that little point about what the country of Macedonia can do may be something the committee may want to reflect on.
Well, who bids against Fed bid?
I beg your pardon?
Who bids against?
Well,
I mean,
in theory, there are other sources of reverse auctions. But I was not at all surprised when I saw in the GAO report that more than 99% of the reverse auctions on FedBizOpps that GAO found were done by FedBid.
do you happen to know anything about the profitability of that particular company that's listed as part of the Army, incidentally? Have you ever looked at that?
No, sir.
Well, thank you very much for that. If anyone has any questions, anything else, Ms. Velasquez?
Yes, I just would like to ask the panel about reverse auction process. And we have to be so very careful that we do not cause harm and make the programs whole and being effective. But we have found that the reverse auction process may move too quickly for competitors to accurately reassess their costs or the way they will actually do the work. There have been even reports in which the buyer has to step in to prevent a supplier from submitting a price that will harm the company. Do you believe that contractors are actually able to perform the contract at the price they bid, or are some putting the viability of the company at risk? Ms. Peebles.
Thank you, Congresswoman Velasquez. If I understand the question correctly, it's basically how is a company going to respond to this purchasing mechanism? Mm-hmm. And I will speak as a business owner in this regard for myself, not on behalf of WIP, regarding this particular issue. There are so many unknowns when submitting pricing to FedBid as compared to a standard procurement process that it leads basically to a bifurcated decision. One, if you are somewhat unsophisticated with the process and you see the lag time hit and you're like, I want to win a federal contract, and you see somebody's competing against you, you think, okay, well, I can do it for less because apparently that's what the market will bear. Mm-hmm. And without knowing everything involved, you can bid so low and make a commitment that you are causing damage to your company financially. The flip side is because there are so many unknowns that you can inflate the price to cover against what you don't know. And if you're the only bidder, you have not given the government a good price that you would have given under normal channels.
Yeah. Mr. Gordon?
It's interesting. I think it may be worth pursuing this area. It's one where, with some hesitation about the workload at GAO, I would say GAO might be able to do a study about the impact of this low pricing on small businesses. That said, I have a lot of confidence in our small businesses and in their sophistication. I am a little bit skeptical when people tell me companies are bidding so low that they're putting their company at risk. I understand that in an auction, in a normal auction, people sometimes bid higher than they should. I appreciate that. I've actually gone down that path personally without disclosing any details here. But I trust our companies. The fact is, in a federal procurement of any sort, a sealed bid, a procurement that we've been doing for more than 100 years, companies submit bids. Do they sometimes submit bids that are foolishly low? Yes. But I trust their judgment. They are business people. I think we can trust them to make judgments about how low they should or shouldn't bid.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Mind if I?
Sure.
Thank you. What you're really describing, Ms. Peoples, is a race to the bottom, an opportunity to bid virtually against yourself, blind, taking a risk that may be inappropriate in the moment. Everybody wants to work. Contractors, companies have overhead. They need to cover it. Sometimes they do work below their costs. They don't always do it on purpose. The other side of it is that people can actually bid at a much higher price, just randomly taking an opportunity. So that, I mean, to your point, I personally bid probably 3,000 jobs, big and small, in my life, and believe me, it is often the case in a very competitive market that the low bidder is the guy who never finishes the job, which is, you know, another issue having to do with a lot of other things in terms of bonding. The goal is to get the product you want at a reasonable price and let companies make money and thrive and take advantage of all the opportunity that the government has for small businesses. And it seems to me that reverse auctioning is often antithetical to the outcome, the pricing, and to competition. With that, if we have a couple minutes, if anybody wants to say anything else that hasn't been said or we haven't heard, go ahead. Anyone?
Previously, I was asked a question regarding meeting the woman-owned small business goals. And if I could just take a moment and elaborate on the answer. This is my first time to testify, so I want to get my thoughts together. 2 points that I wanted to make, and then I'm done here. Sole source was a phenomenally good law for woman-owned business. It allows access to contracts for woman-owned business, and it is a very good vehicle for contracting officers. We do not want to raise the WOSB goal. We want to meet it first. Thank you.
If I can make a comment about that, it has always been my position that if the federal government struggled for so many years, and this is why I initiated a government-wide report that I issued for almost 14 years, measuring contracting goals and achievement of all the federal agencies government-wide. So what good does it do that we increase it to 30 if for the first time last year and this year, I think that we went beyond the 23% for the first time government-wide. Yet, there are those who claim that ineligible firms were codified as small businesses. So let's do this right. Let's achieve those goals, and then we will move from there to increase those contracting goals. I agree with you.
Marvelous job. These are not easy questions. They're complicated, but you've helped us, you've given us a lot of opportunity for direction, and I'd ask that you watch this committee if you can and see what comes out. We'll be doing some legislation shortly. And I'll recommend to Chairman Chavez the full committee markup legislation addressing verification, reverse auctions, and the process for implementing a small business contracting reforms. I ask unanimous consent that members have 5 days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. This hearing is now adjourned, and thank you very much.